Okay. Right. Thank you for coming along today, Phil. It's great to see you. Now, before I get you to introduce yourself and tell everyone a bit more about what you do and what your company does, Watertight International does, I just want to talk about prime the subject that which we're going to talk about, which is resilience. I mean, since I've started on this journey of climate change exploration, the term resilience has come up numerous times. Now, when resilience is often talked about, it's often talked about on a macro scale. Governments putting in measures to be resilient against future climate change impact, whether it be rise in sea levels, flooding, or wildfires that we've seen in the US and Australia. But what I want to do is draw back a bit and talk about resilience on a macro scale, because we're in a global pandemic at the moment. And what I can imagine, they've spent billions of pounds already in resilience measures in keeping the economy going. So in such situations, you'll often find that climate change is put on the back seat. So I just want to talk about resilience on a macro level. So Phil, would you like to introduce yourself and a bit more about what you do at Watertight International and what they do as a company?
Yeah, my name's Phil Evers, Business Development Director for Watertight International. What we aim to achieve as a company is to create an environment where we can help make people's properties, individuals, residential and commercial, make them more flood resilient. So by not just putting the barrier up and trying to stop the water from getting in, but making it more of a resilience, so that, I mean, at present, on average, when someone floods, it can take up to 10 months to get them back into their properties. Now, what we aim to achieve is to, if you flood on a Friday, we can get you back in your property on a Monday. The insurance companies obviously love that, because last year alone, I think they spent 1.9 billion from the floods back in 2020. And a lot of that money obviously was not spent on making the properties, putting new carpets, curtains and stuff of that ilk in. It was more to do with the accommodation, because that's people out for so long. So these flood resilience measures we put in place are, typically based around making the property, so if water does get in, how do we get that water back out as swiftly as possible and get that person moved back in, which would be something as simple as just tiling the floor rather than the carpet. So you just mop up, sterilize it again, sanitize it, and then you can move the people back into the premises. So that is what we work very closely with the Environment Agency, so that we can work hand in hand to try and minimise the impact. Because it's not just a financial impact. Most of these poor people, I go out to see, they're in a terrible state. Sometimes it's not just the physical items they lose. It's there could be mental strains on them, financial impact. It's just there's so much that it can impact a person who's flooded.
Yeah.
So that is just a brief outline of what we are trying to achieve at Watertight International.
All right, thanks, Phil. I mean, it's very important. I mean, people listening to the series might wonder why I'm talking to a company, because it started off talking about climate change. But there was a research done, and it was identified that over the next century, water rainfall every year is going to increase by 10%. Now, with that in mind, flooding is prevalent in a lot of these high-risk areas. It's not something that we can forget and think it's not going to happen if you live in a flood risk area. Now, last week, I spoke to lady, Heather Shepherd, from the Flood Action Forum. Now, we talked about the impact of floods on the victims. As you mentioned, there's mental strain, financial, all these things. So I think the reason why I want to talk to you today is especially important because people don't always realize that there are resilient measures available to the individual, to households. And that's why it's so important to talk to you today. Now, you're talking about barriers and so on. What sort of barriers are we talking about? Is it around the property or is it through access points? What are we actually looking at if you're talking to make a house flood resilient?
What we offer barriers that will fit across doorway openings, depending on the height of the floods. We also offer window barriers, which can then protect the window to a certain height. We also do what's called composite flood doors. So again, if the water gets up to 600 millimeters, these doors that we install tend to keep the majority of the water out. So they're the type of the basic measures we do. But one of the biggest ingresses of water, believe it or not, is air bricks, which so once it gets over a certain height, the water just comes in through the air bricks. Yeah. Toilets, again, because of the back, I think it was back in '79, they brought out the new DDA Compliance Act, which is every home built since then has to have a ground floor toilet. Now, if you look at any of the images on the Panorama, BBC News, when they go to these places that have flooded, you'll find that there's lots of raw sewage inside the property. Now, that raw sewage, it doesn't come from the outside. What it does, it comes back up through the sewage chambers, so through the manholes, back into the house, through the through the toilets, through washing machine, where you plumb the washing machines in. So what we tend to do there is we would fit the non-return valves in the outside inspection chambers. Again, that then just gives it another level of resilience. We then also protect the exterior brickwork with a water seal, which basically is like a silicone-based. So once it's sprayed on, again, it's not 100%. It will stop water because you're never going to think water's going to get in. It will get in. What we try and do is mitigate the amount of water that comes in. And any water that does come in, we try and get it out faster than it is coming in, thus minimising the risk to the homeowner or the commercial premises. So they're just a few of the different measures that we can implement to help your property more resilient.
Anyone who's worked with water will understand how difficult it is to stop water. I do a bit of plumbing at home. The amount of times I've had leaks where water will get in the smallest gap, or it's incredibly difficult. So you're right. You can't always stop it 100%, but it's about mitigating the damage. Last year, before we moved to my current property, we had a flood. It wasn't a bad, it was just a pipe that burst underneath the house. It took us a year and the overall cost was 36,000. So really, we don't always realize the cost that it's going to take to put a house or property back to its original condition. Resilience is often far cheaper than it is to repair the situation. So the cost of these barriers and situation, does that come from the insurance company or is it an individual cost?
It tends to be if it's in an area where there's been more than 18 premises flooded, the Environment Agency and the government put money in for PFR measures. So basically, if they will give you a grant for around about £5,000 to try and put your property back together, and then what they'll do is they will also put £5,000 grant in place for flood resilience measures. So, i.e., putting the barrier up, putting these non-return valves in, flood doors, etc. Now, they are capped at £5,000. So what tends to happen then is because a lot of these measures cost a lot more, the homeowners themselves ordinarily have to make up the shortfall of what is required. Now, that doesn't mean we can't help them if they haven't got the capacity to make up the shortfall. What we do as a company, we will advise on the best plan of attack. So we use the money that they have got from the council grants and the EA grants. to try and best protect their home. Again, it's not 100% because we can't guarantee that. But our PFR measures are, basic, just to A, peace of mind, and B, if the water does get in, how quickly can we get that water back out? So they're the type of, where that money comes from. What we tend to find is a lot of these people who do flood on a regular basis, they don't have any insurance. Insurance companies won't touch them. Now, there is, in the not too distant future, the Environment Agency, Floodry, and SciWem, they are looking at PFR measures so that at the moment, if you buy a house, you've got what's called an EPC certificate, which is an energy performance certificate. What we're trying to achieve as an industry now is to put a flood protection certificate in place. So if you've got a scale of 1 to 10, I mean, it's not ironed out this, so this is just speculative, the 1 to 10. But if you got a 1 to 10, and 10 being the most flood resilient and a 1 being the minimum, if you've got a property that we've protected and it measures up to an 8, then the insurance premiums will go down, as will the amount of excess that the homeowner or the commercial premises will need to pay out at the end.
I mean, it's great to hear this, because I think perhaps a lot of these changes have come around because of climate change. The government or the industry is recognizing that you can't avoid, this is a problem that can't be avoided. It's going to continue happening. And I don't know how far back, a good few years back, there was talk where people were just being stuck with no way of stopping this annual flood or a seasonal flood that they were experiencing. No insurance company would touch them. At least it's good to hear that there are changes coming in place. Is this because of climate change, or is it that there's been just pressure put on the government or the agencies to do something for these people stuck in these areas?
Well, we as a company, I mean, we are one of there's 4 companies like ourselves on the Environment Agency framework. We are the only impartial company on that framework. So what we tend to look at is where the flooding occurs. And yes, go back to your question, it is, climate change related, because, just me personally, I've lived in my home 27 years. And 4 Fridays ago, when that really bad storm hit, my house flooded, and this is a guy who's in the industry, now I'd implemented measures with the family. So fortunately enough, we put the puddle pumps out, and we put the other bits and pieces in place, which I'd already put them through, which stopped, mitigated any water actually entering the premises. It was mainly outside where we had the issues. Now, so if that's happened to me within 27 years, we've never had flooding in that where I live at all. So yes, it is linked to climate change. The level of rainfall is getting worse. The level of erosion on rivers is getting worse. So it's like it's a double-edged sword. So going back to your question, yes, it is related to that. I think the reason why they're bringing in, implementing this insurance, for the PFR measures is because, the insurance companies, they don't want to pay out. They also don't want someone living in a house without any insurance, because most of the times, most of these properties that are in flood risk areas, which they won't touch, is they're losing out on all them premiums. They're losing out on all these insurance. So they want to work with us, and we're working. There's been 6 codes of practice put in place to try and achieve this level of, so the insurance people are backing it, the government are backing it, and individual companies like ourselves are trying to back it, to basically raise awareness of what you all need to do if you're in a flood risk area, put action plans in place, and then to hopefully deliver something that'll work in the not too distant future if you ever do get to the point where you have to flood.
Yeah, no, that's great, because raising awareness is a key thing. What's it like? Are you still finding that people are unaware of these measures that are in place now? Are you finding that people are surprised that there's a resilient measure that you can put to your property and that there are grants available? Is that something that you're finding?
Yeah, yeah. I was at three premises yesterday in Cambridge, and the three premises were very close to each other. Two of them flooded on December the 23rd. The other one didn't. But as a group, they just got together and said, "What do we need to do?" So obviously they looked into, Watertight International, made a couple of inquiries, and then I went out to just basically give them as much free advice as possible. Now that might end up in turning into an order, and we get some work from it. But then again, it might not. But they were dumbstruck at what was available out there. It's so much so that one of the guys who didn't flood, he was on the parish council, so he's now going to go back to the council, speak to them, and see what grants are available for his neighbours. And so if these people don't know about what is out there, not just products, but help, so much help and support now that is being put in place, that we need a vehicle to direct them that way. People like yourself doing documentaries on this is only going to heighten awareness, which is, I think, is a great thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, imagine for many years, people felt hopeless, just left on their own to deal with this situation. And flooding, even though my flood was particularly small compared to what's happening due to climate change, a year spent with machinery, people working, clearing out your house, out of your home, can be very stressful. It's incredibly stressful on the family. As we're coming to the end, Phil, is there any last messages you want to give to people out there?
Well, the first thing is make yourself a flood plan. So it could be something you're never going to flood instantly. You're always going to have some time. Now, whether that you might only have half an hour, you might have an hour, you might have 24 hours, whatever that is, make yourself an action plan. So, for instance, anything that is of like memories, like photographs. If you're going to flood, move them upstairs. With a flood plan, you're going to mitigate how much heartache you're going to go through. A lot of these people are out there, and if on our website and on lots of other companies' websites, you'll see there are action plans in there. There's a lady out there called Mary Donham. Now she, if you go on her website, there's an absolute mind of information in there, and it's all impartial, all free. She's flooded twice over the last number of years, and she's a great inspiration to the likes of us. We can only try and follow what she does, because she's like a trailblazer. But yeah, but going forward for anybody, an action plan and research. If you're going to buy a property in Tewkesbury, which floods regularly, look into it. Look at the levels, the sea levels, what the water table's like. All that information's there on the Environment Agency's website. So again, do your research, put an action plan in place, flood plan, and then, with a bit of luck, if you do, flood, you've mitigated how much damage, you made your property more resilient just simply by taking your photographs upstairs and keeping them out of the way of the water. It's basic, but it works. We've seen it time and time again.
Yeah, no, thank you, Phil. That's important. You mentioned that heartache, because it can be incredibly soul destroying when you see your personal properties, some things that can't be replaced, damaged, because it can leave you in a state of panic if you're not ready for it. You just see water coming in, you don't know what to do. And often when you're in panic, you can become paralyzed and not do anything. So preparing is a key message, preparing. Thank you for that. And at least people now know that help is there. They're not left on their own. There is ways of making your property more resilient. And like you say, research first. Don't just buy a property, research, because flood risk is increasing everywhere. I'm not far from Cambridge, where we live in Huntingdon. They had a massive rainfall. There's flooding everywhere. Luckily, we're on a hill, but there's a lot of people who really suffered a lot of damage. And it is through companies like yourself that are helping people. And we're working with the agency through grants, helping people be more resilient. And for that, I thank you. So thank you very much, Phil, for talking with us, giving us some advice. Really appreciate it.
Very good. Thank you very much for your help.
All right. Thanks, Phil.